Let's get some analysis now. Professor Michael Wesley, Professor of International Relations and Deputy Vice-Chancellor Global at the University of Melbourne. Some quite frank remarks from the Vice President there that if Israel doesn't change course, the US will. Is this maybe a tipping point in Israel's war on Gaza?
It's starting to look like it, Kieran. The fact that that so many of the countries around the world that have supported Israel and supported its right to defend itself have now criticised this, and their citizens, obviously, of countries like Australia and the UK and the United States and Canada were, killed in this attack. I think really does start to raise fears in Israel that it really will be completely isolated on this. And I think the fact that Israel moved to open that border crossing so soon after the conversation with President Biden shows just how worried Israel is.
There are a lot of Israelis who have been critical of Prime Minister Netanyahu. There's not a lot of love for Prime Minister Netanyahu. Those that I've spoken to have said that as soon as this war's done, he's out of there. He's gone. They blame him in many respects for the intelligence failure on October 7. So this is this complexity here. There's a lot of Israelis who think that Netanyahu needs to have a different approach to get the hostages home.
That's right. I mean, there seems to be rising anger in Israel against Netanyahu, and what's hard to read from this distance, Kieran, is how many of his supporters are among those who have changed sides and decided that he needs to go. Netanyahu is the great survivor of Israeli politics. He's been plagued by scandal, by corruption claims, by all sorts of criticism, and yet he continues to come back and he continues to put together coalition agreements that have him as Prime Minister of Israel. So it's probably a little bit too early to say that this is the end of Netanyahu, but certainly there is rising opposition to him.
And there's the other point, and I know that many of our viewers, yourself and other observers of this, you have great sympathy for the Israeli position because you've still got over 100 hostages being held by Hamas, there's no doubt. But you get to a point where the weight of fatalities on civilians and so on, and the international pressure, it just builds and builds and builds. And then Israel's legitimacy is being questioned.
And from a purely kind of military political point of view, Kieran, I would add that it's really hard to know what the end game here is for Israel. One thing we can be certain of is that this war will not eliminate Hamas. That military actions like this only radicalise people further. And then you have the question of the long-term future of Gaza. There are still millions of Palestinians who will need to live long-term in Gaza. It is not clear at all what authority can be stood up that is a non-Hamas influenced authority to rule over Gaza. Does that mean that Israel will permanently occupy Gaza, which would seem to be a very, very difficult proposition from where we stand today?
Yeah, it's diabolical, isn't it, in every aspect. Professor Wesley, appreciate it as always. We'll see you next week.